The fall of America's housing market last decade and the events that led up to the world economy collapsing feels like one of those events that could be considered too soon to make into a movie, not due to sensitivity issues or out of fear of offending those involved, but because there are so many factors to consider and so many moving parts to the enterprise that it could be decades until we can fully understand what happened. Unless, of course, the factors that led to the housing bubble bursting are depressingly simple. The people in charge didn't know what the hell they were doing. To depict that on film will require a very subtle hand and a dramatic touch, which is why you definitely get the director of farcical comedies like Anchorman, Step Brothers and the other guys, Adam McKay, on board. But with an all-star cast and a comedic director, maybe the best way to portray those in charge of plummeting the world into an economic recession would be through big laughs. After all, the whole situation was just one big joke in retrospect. In 2005, Michael Burry, the hedge fund manager at Scion Capital, discovers that the US housing market is heading towards a collapse. Due to the banks not denying loans to those who would never be able to pay them back, it means that these high-risk loans will provide little return, prompting a collapse in 2007. Wanting to profit off of this, Michael bets against the housing market, and since the market is considered perfectly stable, the banks are more than willing to take his bet. Bond salesman Jared Vennett catches wind of this and also plans to profit, but a wrong phone call also causes him to inform Wall Street hedge fund manager Steve Baum, who is determined to find out just how the system could allow this to happen. The closest comparison to The Big Short would be 2013's The Wolf of Wall Street, and I'm not just talking about discovering the dirty underbelly of America's financial marketplace and portraying a true story in that environment. It's also in the way the film is presented, with a lot of fourth wall breaking narration, humorous cutaways, etc. While it may come across as trying to copy a formula that has worked very well in the past, it's safe to say that director Adam McKay does a significantly better job at aping Martin Scorsese than other directors in recent memory, such as David O. Russell. But maybe that type of approach is necessary for complex Wall Street true story movies, since both The Big Short and The Wolf of Wall Street are filled with dense, nigh incomprehensible terminology that will fly over the heads of the 99%, and maybe that's the entire point. While you may find yourself catching up to a few scenes beforehand once you've wrapped your head around what a credit default swap or a collateralized debt obligation is, you're still able to follow the movie well enough because it moves at just the right pace, and it feels like these characters are learning about the corrupt nature of America's housing market as they go along with the audience. There's usually at least one character on hand to ask just what is going on or demanding some form of clarification, which gives the audience a cipher in which to absorb the necessary information. With a story this complex, it's a necessity, yet it doesn't feel like The Big Short is dumbing its story down. And when there are no such characters on hand, Adam McKay is quick to provide a gut-bustingly funny celebrity cameo to explain things in a friendly environment to the audience, but spoiling just who these characters are comprised of or how they're presented would be telling. But those celebrity cameos and what they represent thematically in The Big Short might just be the ace up its sleeve. The movie frequently cuts to montages of what's been happening in the past year, the celebrity breakups, the TV events, the viral videos, the movies that got released, etc. But during these montages, there's very little mention of the politics and the economic downfall that was happening during that time. Adam McKay and co-writer Charles Randolph and the editors are essentially putting together a collage of what was considered important that year in the popular culture and in public lexicon, and these vital world-shaping mistakes that was happening right under everyone's noses didn't even make a blip on the world's collective radar. Near the beginning, Ryan Gosling, our narrator, explains that this housing bubble crisis was spotted by Michael Burry doing the one thing that no one else thought to do. He looked. Yes, we can blame the big bankers who knowingly and fraudulently exploited the system and the American people for their own selfish capitalist greed. Yes, even those with the foresight and the resources to see the collapse coming, the heroes, quote-unquote, of the movie, they're trying to profit off of it. And yes, it's easy to say that the people in charge were too stupid, too selfish, and too short-sighted to stop what amounted to a worldwide economic recession with consequences that are still being felt to this day. But maybe a portion of that blame has to go to us, the general public, the 99% who could have seen it coming if we spent more time paying attention to what our governments and bankers were doing instead of being distracted by shallow interests. Maybe if we paid more attention to politics or the economy instead of the latest untalented faux celebrity, ultimately irrelevant sporting events or tabloid gossip, we could have maybe seen this coming and prepared for it, or at least known who was accountable in the court of public opinion. It's more of a subliminal message that I've gleaned by looking at the small aspects of the film, and The Big Short is hardly a 99% takedown, but I think that its screenplay is brave enough to suggest that perhaps the big banks weren't the entire problem, although they certainly were a big part of it, especially with the final moments of the film presenting some depressing exposition through text that shows that the bankers and those in charge haven't learned a goddamn thing. Who needs hindsight when there's cold hard cash to be made? With the cast, it's surprising who ends up standing out. Christian Bale's character, Michael Burry, is vital to the plot, but as a character, he's not far removed from other countless socially awkward, neurotic businessmen who only understand the numbers. He walks around his office barefoot, he plays the drums loudly, listens to heavy metal, and looks at numbers all day, but there's not a lot of depth to him. Bale does a terrific job at giving him lots of facial tics and a fascinating on-screen presence, but there's not a lot to remember about Burry as a character. Ryan Gosling gets many of the funniest lines of the movie, but feels like a reskinned Jordan Belfort from The Wolf of Wall Street, and while Brad Pitt is nearly unrecognisable as a paranoid retired banker Ben Rickett, his role amounts to an extended, glorified cameo, though it's admirable that this is another movie that Brad Pitt has produced recently that tackle hard-hitting social issues like Selma and 12 Years a Slave. Pitt is clearly a great producer, funding movies that feel like they deserve to be made about stories that deserve to be told. The real standouts of the cast come from John Magaro and Finn Whitrock as two amateur investors who stumble upon Michael Burry's findings and bring in Ben Rickett to help them bet against the banks. Their story arc initially feels like it's taking up way too much screen time, as these two are relatively inexperienced and not as interesting to watch as the rest of the cast, but when they're confronted by Rickett near the end of the movie about the consequences of their profiteering, their arcs start to come together and hits home just how depressing this situation really is, and how the people we're following in this movie are not necessarily the good guys, which is exacerbated even further through Steve Carell as Mark Baum, and Carell might have given the best performance of his career in The Big Short. Foxcatcher last year proved that he does have dramatic chops, and his numerous comedic performances have proved his natural gift for comedy, but with The Big Short it feels like the best of both worlds, as he's essentially playing the "are you effing kidding me" character. He's a naturally angry individual, but as the movie progresses and he learns that he's only scratched the surface on the corruption taking place in America's banking system, and the greed being the sole motivating factor at play here, he just absolutely loses it, and Carell carries that ideal to the best extreme possible. There's so much happening internally with this character, and Carell gives easily one of the best performances in recent memory, and I'm kind of amazed that out of all of the actors in The Big Short that could have been nominated for an acting Oscar this year, it was Christian Bale of all people, and not Steve Carell. The only thing holding back Baum as a character is that it would seem a lot of his emotional baggage has been left on the cutting room floor. We learn that his brother committed suicide and that he was terrible at emotionally supporting him beforehand, but then it's dropped for over an hour and comes right out of nowhere near the end. It feels like a stop-start, pace-breaking plot point that didn't really add much to what was already an incredibly complex and engaging character without it. Also, when watching the trailer back, you will notice a few lines and moments that didn't wind up in the final movie, which indicates that maybe some aspects and story points in the movie were cut. Maybe those cuts were made to help the pacing, as despite being a 130-minute movie, it feels shorter and it does feel like an exhilarating ride that is never boring despite the depressing and grounded subject matter. It is edited incredibly well, the transitions are engaging and the camera work is great, but not too stylish as to serve as a distraction from the subject matter. The music by Nicholas Britell didn't really leave much of an impact on me, to be honest. But there's not much to say about the production of The Big Short, which indicates that it was very well put together, as you only really notice the subtle nuances of film production if something is done badly. So after all of that, here's my conclusion. The Big Short may not be the best of the 8 movies nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars this year, but it's potentially the most important, as it delves into a very relevant topic and manages to make it accessible to the average moviegoer without dumbing it down and diluting the story's ultimate impact. Adam McKay was an inspired choice, as many of the sequences delve into very dark comedy, with many moments that will have you shaking your head in disbelief that things actually happened this way, just like Steve Carell does in a phenomenal career best performance. McKay is the perfect director to see the farce in the housing bubble fiasco, and is quick and right to place most of the blame on the irresponsible, hubristic bankers put in charge of the country. But what were we, the people, paying attention to during that time? I give The Big Short 4.5 stars out of 5.
I'm sure the world's banks have more incentives than greed. You're wrong.
Hey Hey folks, thanks for listening to my review. You can find these reviews a day early on my website, so be sure to visit www.trilbee.com regularly where you can find a written version. I'm just experimenting with a new format, so let me know if you like these audio reviews to complement the written ones. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. But more importantly, what do you think of the film? Be sure to let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to subscribe for more movie-related analysis. Please hit that like button as it really helps me out, and you can support my content through Patreon for exclusive perks and rewards and updates. I'll see you folks next time.